To describe the Rugrats TV show as being some kind of hellish fever dream I'm not even sure I didn't just imagine, wouldn't be anything new, interesting, or even worth the air it takes anymore because it's so well established as being exactly that. Whether it's all an intentional representation of the distorted, warped way newborn babies see the world, or whether it's simply just some kind of hyper-stylized artistic choice, it doesn't really matter because a huge part of its appeal comes from the fact that it's made so anyone can just enjoy it for whatever aspect happens to appeal most to them. Although, being a show about babies that go on adventures, I have to say that my one, probably has to be the hellish fever dream parts over the babies going on adventures. So for me at least, when it comes to looking back at the series as a whole, the absolute peak, surprisingly far surpassing any of the feelings the show would ever achieve, came exclusively from the video games, which alone is insane. I mean, from the offset they were doomed to fall into my territory immediately anyway, just because of the source material, but still, and as if the devs either leaned into it or didn't even try to hide it, there is way too much surreal, weird and spooky content in these games. Again, more than there should be, and there should be a lot anyway just because of the show. To kick things off, the immediate go-to you've probably already heard of is always the strange, out-of-place horror level in Search for Reptar.
That'll keep those shadow monsters away, champ.
Which, is a good one, but honestly, that's not really what I'm talking about here at all. Because really, you don't even need to leave the overworld to see scenes like this. I've always thought these games were really unique in that they give you a really clear look at how what obviously started as an art style used in reference material very clearly immediately fell apart as soon as someone gave out the task of realizing it, of stretching it over models to create a 3D space. And translating 2D to 3D is kind of infamous for never working anyway, but whereas with the show they could just storyboard and direct every scene, space out and angle the frame to focus on whatever element it needs to look how it needs to, here the frame is just whatever the 3-year-old playing happens to violently crash into. So just by virtue of designing and populating the space being this bigger, more involved task having to account for literally everywhere, they just clearly and understandably had a really hard time doing so. And now there's just like this fucking plant in this pink hallway lit in the most eerie, unnatural way possible because there is no lighting. And why would there be? There's none in the show. And that's the point. It's not supposed to look real, it's supposed to look like the style of the show, obviously. But that was just never gonna happen in this dimension because it's the wrong dimension. It's my dimension. And something else that comes with that is the fact that I can relate to 3D in a way I can't 2D. So inevitably what ends up happening is my brain doing this thing where it places me here, in this scene, this environment. And it's hell, where nothing makes sense to me, everything looks wrong, and I have as much chance of getting out as Tommy does here, and he literally can't. Then you just have things like that one level of the game that has all of that because it's set in the overworld, just with the added bonus of the entire place being upside down. And it's at this point again I'm going to need to remind myself that, this game is real. Also, the thought of being in a house with a baby that looks like this running around on the ceiling isn't a comforting thing to think about. Elements like the darkened tree line in this one park level and the ironic, almost sarcastically cheerful music as if to point out that the game isn't supposed to be, even though the game is supposed to be, create this dissonance that all exaggerate every other mildly unnerving element, including like this clown. Because that's just not normal, right? It's not just me. But it's like even the clown, on its own, might not have been quite so bad if it wasn't for something else coming along and toppling the innocent tone, that again was barely held together here anyway. And ultimately, in all, that's what I find so interesting here, because this is not how you make a kids game. It's like they messed it up so badly, and I'm glad they did, because the game has this nightmarish atmosphere because of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this game that after having replayed it recently, I've only just now realised weren't dreams that I've had. The uncomfortable amount of just horrifically designed clowns in this game being a big one. As confusing as this is going to sound initially, the mini-golf stages in these games always took a sharp turn into weird just because to exist, they need to take place in something that couldn't exist. Like mini-golf courses in the woods, an actual like full-sized castle, and famously this game's fully explorable tomb within a pyramid that's not even like part of the golf course. To even know it's a thing, you just have to like fuck off from the golf section and explore, but even then it's like 8 courses in and not once was there anything else to see in the other one, so why would you even explore at this point? It's crazy, and I feel like I'm saying this all the time at this point, but even though I'm pointing out that it was like their unintentional mistakes which make my favourite aspects of this game, I'm certain here at least it was the point. It's basically just an Easter egg, but if you were like me and stumbled into this by accident, the labyrinth in this golf section of a kid's game, then were chased out by a robot mummy, you'd cry too. But going back and more generally speaking, a lot of the game's scenes have just aged perfectly so they look odd, to be nice, from the offset. And again, the peak of that is seen in the environments, just straight up being some liminal ass spaces existing in between nowhere and triggering that weird, dreary, unsettling feeling in your mind like you've seen them before despite definitely having not. Not just because of everything I've mentioned already, but in large part because of the content of the show just taking place in really standard relatable places like homes, public parks, shops, and even like industrial areas. And then, even further still, on top of that, it's covered in all these funhouse colours and distorted shapes, the sounds, specifically this sound. Yeah, whatever that is. At best, it creates an interesting and strange little atmosphere within the most unlikely of games, but at worst, if nothing else, it's a cool look into just how badly it can all go wrong. So easily. Because, for example, separately, listening to the soundtrack, yeah, it's fun, cartoonish, and genuinely well composed, but when it's combined with, let's say, a stylized model animated a little strangely, it's like it knocks everything out of balance, creating a domino effect that topples everything else around it, bringing the whole game down into whatever we have here. A lot more on the nose and less subtly though, Let There Be Light, the game's infamous survival horror level that, despite what I've said, is still worth at least mentioning anyway, vaguely follows the plot of an episode in which all of the lights in the house go out and you just have to make your way through the dark halls to open the fridge and release it all back into the house again. The light, that is. And I mean, that alone is something I cannot get enough of. It's like it makes sense in the mind of a baby, so that's just how this world functions. The laws of this universe are governed by that logic. But the whole thing is out of place more so just because of how suddenly it plummets into this. The dark house, the ambient sound and music, the downright evil placement of the ghosts, considering this is a kid's game, they're all like at the very end of long corridors and standing in doorways so they slip out behind you, making no sound while they move. It's harrowing. And they're practically in every room as well, so you get this impression that they're just moving around up there on their own. Not that the ones you can see are any better, because like I said, they're positioned to be watching you from a distance standing right in the way of where you need to be. And what's infinitely worse is they have like permanent aggro states, meaning unless you deal with them immediately, they will like come and find you wherever you are. Again though, like I've said, it's not my favourite example of what makes this game so creepy and doesn't really apply to the general point I'm trying to make about the environments, but it at least plants the seed that this game isn't just some kind of glorified colouring book. It's a shame that the game's sequel, Studio Tour, is much less of a game, so there's nothing much more to see, but just being set in a different environment, not being any standard relatable living room or toy shop, everything instead just looks like what reminds me of a lobby from a dead Y2K 3D MMO chat room. Again, yeah, it's a shame it ends there and the rest of the game is just standard mini-games, but it is a Rugrats game, so it's like, what am I even complaining about anymore? Ironically, I see it as being worse just because it's a better game, or at least that it does way less wrong. It's better at being what it's supposed to be, which only really makes it all the more surprising how the same can absolutely not be said for In Paris the movie, however, which is not only a bigger game that makes all the same mistakes again, but even brand new ones that, despite being an expert on this subject, I have not seen made anywhere else in my life and definitely never will. It's my favourite by far, not just for being a relatively bigger game, but because the environment is physically larger and plays more in an open world. You can also like pick whatever character you want to run around as, which basically only really sentences you to whatever 4 lines of dialogue they're associated with, but still I usually just go with Phil because he has good base decks. But then there's the fact that that open world was supposed to be a theme park in Paris. Theme parks that, you know, look like this, and that I know there's absolutely no way this can. And because a huge part of everything a theme park is comes from the atmosphere the loud mechanical roller coasters and crowds of screaming people create, when you don't have that, it's just like not even a theme park at all anymore. So what is it? It feels like a film set or a model of an actual location, because that's what it is, just 2 layers deep. It's pretending to be something that's pretending to be something else. At the end of the day, it's still a theme park, so at the very best, when it's working the most, it feels like an abandoned theme park, because there are no other people or characters here anywhere. Which makes sense, it's a PS1 game, but despite not being able to create anything anywhere near an accurate digital representation of a theme park for any reason, technical or otherwise, doing so anyway, despite that, means we now have this. And don't even get me started on the golf or slime world. I mean, they didn't even try there. For a start, what children's theme park is themed around golf? And the slime world is just one of the strangest environments just ever conceptualized in a human's brain. I still couldn't even tell you what this place is. It's dark, wet, and the only things here are deep lakes of slime. Don't get me wrong, I know the origin, the reference material was the movie, which I usually just ignore anyway, but here, in this case, it doesn't even matter, because the point that it's so strange still stands regardless. It doesn't even feel like it could exist in this universe, as weird as it is already. Even the what's become obligatory Rugrats mini-golf stages take a nosedive, being like nighttime cityscapes, ancient Japanese countrysides, again the slime holes, and like mountain tops with no visible entrance or exit. It's like not even a fun fake mountaintop course, it's like literally the summit of a real ass mountain. Which is a bit odd. And what's even stranger is it could have easily been just another course against a mountainous backdrop, but it isn't. Because, and for some reason, this was one of the few places in this game they decided to pour a disproportionate amount of effort into, making it look and sound great, but it really shouldn't because it's such an irrelevant part of the game. not to mention Rugrats as a whole. When it comes to gameplay, what you actually do here in the whole game, I honestly couldn't even tell you, to be honest. I remember playing it for hours at a time over years and years, but doing literally nothing, to the point where revisiting it now I have no idea how it even works, what you have to do. Anything, because of all the time I spent just wandering around. But really, that's the best part, because everything else is so weirdly janky in comparison. Like, for example, the lack of ambient theme park sound, for one thing, definitely wasn't out of them worrying it was too loud or annoying. Not just because of both the loud and annoying 4 lines of dialogue I've mentioned already, but because of the jump scare immediately at the start of the game. Triggered by going anywhere near the only thing on the landscape that's immediately visually interesting. You literally don't even need to know anything about sound design. You just need to know what sound is to know that when that goes in the red, it means stop. Please. It's such a weird thing because it happens multiple times throughout the game and with a variety of different unexpected sounds, so there's like this feeling of stress that comes with playing it like I haven't ever felt anywhere else. I wouldn't say I enjoy it, but it's unique to the game, I guess. And it's not as if the sound design is generally bad either. There's these really cool levels of detail they went to in things like every bin having stereo-mapped flies buzzing around them. How you're surrounded by wet dripping and slapping in the slime world. The wind on the mountains, the industrial ambience, just not anywhere where it'd actually be appreciated the most, oddly enough.
Usually your reptile amusement park's a happily place.
Unlike the other games, the Rugrats art style and music actually ends up helping more than anything here, because theme parks usually are a little overly jolly and cartoonish, so at least it feels genuine and not ironic or sarcastic in a nightmarish kind of way. But almost as if they still wanted some of that feeling, it still somehow gets weirder than the slime. There's these spots in the game that are like tucked away and hidden from you down obscured side alleys that lead behind rides all up in the mechanical guts. Like all these industrial warehouses and buildings covered in rusty sheet metal that completely purposefully and as if to intentionally drill in that eerie tone that you've just stumbled off the path, both literally in-game and away from the Rugrats game you're playing, drops the consistent established art style and completely cuts all sound, replacing it with this drone, like a mechanical hum under distant metallic clangs. It really is one of the strangest things I've ever encountered in a video game, especially one like this. And it really just adds to the range, the palette of weird things these games have to offer past just being Rugrats games. It's a bit of a digression and doesn't really fit in with what I'm talking about as a whole, but something else I always thought was odd that doesn't really fit at all and is just kind of visually eerie, is how in this one minigame you're running around breaking apart planks of wood, then just out of nowhere with no explanation at all, they just stand up and form a human shape. Which, yeah, alright, whatever, but the way it all happens immediately and then they all like start shambling and lumbering towards you at speed really triggers some kind of primal urge in my brain to run. And despite not having anything to do with what I was talking about, that just about sums up everything. A lot of strange, weird, and when you think about what their intentions must have been, bad decisions that led to the creation of what these games are to me. Strange, weird, but good games. In that sense anyway. There could be a reason for it, there could be hundreds, including the ones I've mentioned. But like I've also mentioned, it doesn't matter and I don't really care. All of these games exist, to me, for this. Rugrats as it was is outdated at this point, and the gameplay definitely isn't something anyone my age is gonna run back to, and there's almost no chance you'll have any fun with them as games now by today's standards, even if you did. But their value as art, if you want to start talking about that, almost goes up with age, because these games and all the sounds, shapes and colours in them will only get better as I get more and more accustomed to newer and newer games, with newer and newer design standards and the more advanced technology used in making them, almost as if the game looks stranger just by comparison, which means it's only gonna get more so. And really, that's as good a reason to play them as any, unless, you know, the babies going on adventures thing specifically appeals to you more than anything else. Don't get me wrong, I am self-aware enough to know that I've been talking this long about Rugrats video games, but in the end you either just get it or you don't. Like I've said, you can enjoy them for whatever reason you want to, and there's no point in me or even you forcing this on yourselves if you really, for some reason, just can't get over the Rugrats part. Although, that being said, I will say that I find it a shame and I feel you're missing out, but I also get it when the good stuff is encased around this.
Ha! This is more fun than eating dirt! Woohoo! Yeah!
So yeah, with that, I'll leave you with that.